Welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure to open this session today. We are at the event NEC+6, taking forward the Turin agenda. And today we will be talking about what gender responsive and climate informed evaluation systems look like. I am Patrizia Cocca. I am the Global Evaluation Initiative team lead for communications and knowledge management, and I will be your host today. In October 2022, the participants at the National Evaluation Capacities Conference in Turin agreed on the Turin Agenda, which called on all to strengthen partnership and redouble our efforts to accelerate the development of resilient, agile, flexible, adaptable, and forward-looking national evaluation systems that help ensure better evidence is generated to support policies that improve people's life. Today, we are here as a part of a series of events that we have organized together with UNDP IAO in the build-up to the next NEC conference that will take place in October 2024. And it is my pleasure to start this event and introduce you the first three distinguished guests. We have Alan Fox, Director ad interim of UNDP IAO. It will be followed by Dugan Fraser, the Program Manager of the GEI. And then it will be Heather Bryant, the Evaluation Advisor of the GEI and UNDP IAO. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We are already over 120 participants, and I give the floor to Alan Fox. Thank you, Alan.
You're on mute, Alan.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, organized by the Global Evaluation Initiative. 6 months ago, 300 of us came together in Turin, Italy, for the 2022 National Evaluation Capacities Conference, jointly organized by UNDP and the Global Evaluation Initiative. The participants came from government, civil society, the United Nations, bilateral and multilateral organizations representing over 100 countries. Collectively, we took stock of the role that national evaluation systems are playing in sustainable development and discussed the way forward post-pandemic. For many, NEC 2022 was the first in-person event since the onset of the pandemic. We reflected on how national evaluation systems were positioned in the face of the turmoil of the pandemic years, the energy and cost of living crises that have followed, and the increase in fragility and hardship in people's daily lives which we see happening around the world. It gave us an opportunity to reflect on the tumult of recent years, how colleagues in other countries were grappling with it, and what is needed to move forward. The overarching theme of the conference was resilience, the resilience of national evaluation systems themselves, but also the essential role these systems play in strengthening the resilience of our societies, especially in the face of crisis and a backslide in human development. Together, we discussed the role of these systems in ensuring evaluation underpins the important decisions made by governments. And our grand finale was the Turin Agenda, a framework for action to strengthen national evaluation systems. The Turin Agenda recognized the challenges that evaluators face and the need for robust, credible, and sustainable systems. but it is only meaningful if it is used to improve systems and to promote the use of evaluation for decision-making. We are happy to see our partners in the GEI have embraced the agenda as a roadmap to strengthen both systems and partnerships worldwide. And today's workshop is a step towards activating the agenda, towards systems evolving in tune with global changes, towards evaluations being squarely behind decision-making everywhere. Looking forward, a central concern is that evaluation systems must be gender responsive and climate informed. And as we move towards NEC 2024, next in the series, gender and climate must shift from being outlying considerations to central components of national evaluation systems. And I hope that our meeting today will be a resolute step in this direction. So before handing over to my friend and colleague Dugan, I'd like to close with a quote from a conference participant that continues to resonate for me. And that is, yesterday evaluation was important, but today it is vital. So I hope you enjoy and take away today's workshop, the next steps as we move forward. And I'm pleased now to pass over to Dugan for the continuation of the start of our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and hello, everybody. A very, very warm welcome to everybody. I'm keeping a close eye on the chat box. If you want to let us know where you're from, we'd be delighted to hear from you. My name is Dugan. I'm the program manager of the GEI. And as Alan said, we are very delighted to be co-convening this work along with UNDP's Independent Evaluation Office. From the time the GEI was launched in November 22, we've been working with countries to strengthen their monitoring and evaluation systems so that they're better placed to be able to gather and use evidence to make better policies and improve the quality of citizens' lives. We do this by helping governments with diagnostic, technical, and other advisory support services. We help them by strengthening the capacities of policymakers, evaluators, and other M&E professionals. And we do a lot of work developing, curating, and amplifying knowledge on M&E. I'm sorry if the drilling behind me is distracting. You know how it is. Terrible timing. The NEC conference and the Turin agenda are both for us very, very important, and we're taking the Turin agenda very seriously. We're integrating several of the Turin themes into our work across our whole program. So climate change and environmental sustainability are things we consider to be absolutely critical. Gender and social inclusion are matters that we're managing to take forward with some support from our Canadian partner, Global Affairs Canada, and we're working hard to build the capacity of the next generation of evaluators. We're absolutely delighted to be here. We're so pleased that you're able to join us, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Heather, to take the opening session forward. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Dugan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's really exciting to see all of the names and the countries streaming in here. So Alan Fox has given us some reminders about the NEC conference held 6 months ago and the resulting Turin agenda. And Dugan has just talked about how the GEI is taking some of the elements forward. And I would just like to say a few words about this event. So as has been mentioned by Alan, the UNDP IEO and the GEI teams have been very keen to continue the energy and the momentum of the Turin event. And rather than wait 2 years until the next conference, we agreed that it would be really great to organize an event every 6 months to continually take stock of the progress we're all making in strengthening national evaluation systems and to continue to share experiences and lessons learned. And so this is the first of these follow-up events. So as Dugan and Alan were both touching on, the Turin agenda is a summary of some very intense discussions that were held last October and touch on a wide range of things that national evaluation systems need to be able to do in order to effectively inform policy design and other decision making. They need to be nationally owned. They need to be context specific. They need to be agile and flexible. They need to be able to connect national and subnational systems. They need to be responsive to changing needs, to crises. I could go on. The Turin Agenda is a really, really intense document. So we decided when preparing for this event that while all of the elements in the Turin Agenda are important, we needed to focus a little bit for this conversation. And so we decided to zoom in on two critical interrelated aspects, as have already been mentioned: the need for evaluations and evaluation systems that take into account the potential, current, and projected impact of policies and programs on climate change and on ecosystems, as well as systems that prioritize inclusion, leaving no one behind, and that actively give voice to people from all walks of life, including women and girls. Well, we think that evaluations and evaluation systems that effectively address climate change resilience will already also address issues of gender and other forms of exclusion. For the purposes of this conversation, we thought it might be useful to break these into parts. And therefore, we're first going to look at questions of climate change and considerations of environmental sustainability. Then secondly, see what lessons we can already learn from progress in integrating gender and inclusion into evaluation systems. And then in a third segment, talk about how we actually bring it all together. And there we hope to hear from you on what countries really need in order to strengthen their evaluation systems and integrate these important questions of climate and ecosystems, gender equality, and social inclusion. And in between, we have a little bit of a break between speakers. We're going to share what many of you have been doing to take forward the Turin Agenda. More on that a little bit later. Over to you, Patrizia.
Thank you, Heather. And so just a reminder that we do have interpretation for French, Portuguese, and Spanish. So if you need to listen in another language, please look for the globe icon down below in Zoom and select the language that you prefer. Also, another reminder for everybody, please leave in the chat comments and questions for our speakers. We are monitoring the chat and we will be passing on your questions to our speakers. The time and the number of attendees will not allow us to give you the floor, but we will be happy to respond to your questions as we move along with the presentation. So as said before, we will have two segments. In between, there will be a 15 minutes break, and then we will go towards the end of the event. Please make sure you have your smartphone with you, because we will be doing an exercise, a poll, and a word cloud, and we would like to listen from you. So keep it at hand. And then without further ado, I'd like to start the first segment of today's meeting, the climate-informed evaluation systems. And today, the moderator of the session is our colleague and friend, Geeta Batra, the Chief Evaluator and Deputy Director for Evaluation of the Independent Evaluation Office of the Global Environment Facility. Geeta, thank you very much for being with us. Please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Many thanks to UNDP and the GEI. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. So to recall what Alan and Dugan pointed out, among other priorities, a commitment was made at the Turin conference to ensure that, and I quote, evaluation systems take into account the potential, current, and projected impact of all policies and programs on climate and ecosystems. So welcome to this session, which is the first on follow-up to integrating and mainstreaming climate into national evaluation systems as a follow-up to the Turin conference. So before I introduce two very good speakers with experience for this session, I wanted to share a few basically 4 takeaways. Of course, I can't shed light on everything we've learned in evaluation, so I welcome your questions through the chat and a visit to the JEF-IO website. But recent experiences of the independent evaluation function at the Global Environment Facility, which I don't know how many you know, it's a global partnership that assists developing countries in meeting the objectives of international environmental conventions such as climate, biodiversity, the UN on combating desertification, etc. So 4 important points of relevance, because there are always questions about how do we get the data, how do we beef up the national M&E systems. I wanted to highlight these 4 points. First, to note that roughly between 180 to 190 countries are signatories to these various environmental conventions. They have set targets for themselves, and they're committed to report on environmental action. So several SDG indicators such as forest cover, water availability, etc., are available with universal coverage and can be relatively easily integrated into M&E systems. Second, many countries' statistical departments collect data on demographics, socioeconomic indicators, which can easily be married, and we've done some of this in Uganda and other countries. You can marry this data with the environmental data. For example, you could also use the longitudinal LSMS data collected by the multilateral institutions or health indicators. We've seen COVID has shown how environment and health are highly correlated. So this would allow combining environmental data with socioeconomic outcomes as well. Third, there's a clear need for inter-ministry coordination and collaboration. And this is also highlighted in SDG 17. This would prevent a lot of double counting of core indicators. There's always this question about which ministry takes credit, etc. But this would avoid double counting. It'll also help promote policy coherence among various departments as well as sectors in a country. And lastly, I want to highlight a very, very important point for any evaluation that is looking to mainstream or even developmental evaluation is taking into account interconnectedness. I think we've all learned through the various crises, climate crises, the COVID crisis, that climate change is linked to other environmental issues. It's a cause as well as an effect. Climate change impacts other environmental areas. The solutions to climate change are also in these other environmental areas through reducing deforestation, restoring ecosystems. In fact, it's increasingly recognized that solutions to climate change are best done through actually nature-based solutions. At the JEF, we focused a lot now on the interconnectedness across these various environmental areas, as well as across environmental, socioeconomic domains through an integrated lens. And through all this, inclusion, gender are mainstreamed. I'd welcome questions through the chat, but now I'd like to introduce our speakers for the session. Ketevan is currently an operations officer at the Global Evaluation Initiative. In addition to being an evaluator, she's also a climate activist, so a lot of passion in this field. With over 10 years of experience at the World Bank, she's worked on monitoring and evaluation of development projects and specialized in evaluation capacity building. She's passionate in integrating climate, environmental, and social lens in nationally led evaluations and informing better decisions for people and the planet. Unfortunately, Susan Sulu, the permanent secretary at the Ministry of National Planning and Development Coordination, will not be able to join us today. So Ketevan will also present some findings from the Solomon Islands in her presentation. So with that, Ketevan, over to you on what climate proofing in national M&E systems would look like. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Geeta. Thanks for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. So as you mentioned about my passion and interest in thinking about how can national M&E systems inform better decisions for people and the planet. And this is what I focus my presentation on. I don't see my presentation on. Is
I'll
it
be
on?
sharing.
Can you just
1
confirm?
minute. 1 minute. I'll be sharing in 1 minute.
Otherwise, I'm happy just to talk through.
It's on now.
Excellent. Next, please. So as I mentioned, I think development decisions that countries make today determines the lives of people and the health of the planet Earth. And this is why we in GI think a lot how national M&E systems need to inform better decisions for people and the planet. And I believe answering this question really requires to think critically about existing national systems and practices, how M&E is done across the programs and policies, and also what is our knowledge and mindsets and assumptions about the interlinkage of climate, human, and natural impacts. Next. In GI, we believe that future M&E systems need to be climate-proofed. And it needs to integrate social and environmental concerns in more integrated way to respond to the complex crisis. This requires more systems approach thinking and understanding the whole iceberg picture. This requires to recognize that climate change and development are interlinked. Next. So what is climate proofing of M&E systems? Countries have already progressed with building capacities for climate reporting under international agreements, under climate finance projects, but there are still gaps to integrate climate lens into the overall development planning and using climate data to provide evidence for adaptive management across national policies and programs. This is why we still need to talk about climate-proof development and climate-proofing M&E systems. This concept really refers to incorporating climate risk monitoring and adaptation measures in the national development planning in a more broad sense. I think that it requires at least two elements to do that. One is to strengthen national M&E architecture to better integrate climate adaptation considerations. And we do have progress in this field where countries have already integrated a national M&E adaptation framework under the national development strategies, as well as integrated climate indicators in the budgeting. But most importantly, I think this requires enhancing processes, coordination, and harmonization across ministries, across subnational units and institutions to cross-support data use on climate change, nature, and human systems. Next, please. There are some key questions that we hope that national M&E systems will answer in terms of how states manage climate risks, how communities are adapting, and how this impacts development outcomes in the long run. This is what climate-proofed M&E systems need to answer in the long run. But answering these questions really requires enhanced capacities in conducting M&Es, in bringing and integrating climate lens into all of our evaluations and programs, and not only those on environmental projects. So where do we start enhancing the national M&E systems with these capacities? Next. In IG or in my group, we when we think about these problems, we usually start by looking at what already exists in the national systems. And we work with governments to do assessment of what are the systems. This helps us to identify areas for improvement, what could be the quick wins to what could be the long-term solutions. And this, in a way, really guides an understanding how to link climate-proofed M&E systems into an overall national planning and budgeting, how climate data and evidence needs to inform better policies and better national programs. This next step to this is to harmonize national monitoring and reporting systems and bring data coordination between the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change with other ministries. We also understand the importance of evaluations that will focus on the nexus of climate, environmental, and social standards and considerations, and most importantly, the use of such data and evidence. This is my 5 minutes on climate proofing, and I will be more than happy to answer more questions in terms of GI thinking, how this area will be developing in the future.
So thank you for this first segment, Ketevan. And I think if there's something to take away, it's the words integration of data, integration of systems, integration and coordination across ministries, and just understanding that the linkages across climate, social, and economic. And you've seen the SDG layered cake, which actually talks very well or speaks to the nexus across these. So I think gone are the days where we can treat each of these in isolation. So thanks very much for that, and look forward to more of GEI's work in that area along with countries. I think with that, why don't you, if you could go ahead on the Solomon Islands, since it's unfortunate we don't have a speaker today. Do you want to share a few slides? Thanks.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned in my previous presentation, we really think how to take this work forward when assisting countries in strengthening their M&E systems and in climate proofing national development strategies. We've been working with Solomon Islands in request with the Ministry of National Planning and Development Coordination to do an initial assessment of how their current national M&E systems are and how to strengthen those, aligning it with climate considerations. So this presentation really will focus on this. Next, please. Maybe you can go in the next one already, as I have covered this. When we look at the M&E systems, when we support the countries in doing this kind of diagnostics, we really look into a broad set of aspects that tells us how M&E systems are doing in the countries. So we've focused on government systems and understanding policy planning and budgeting, evaluation and monitoring and reporting, but also an overall ecosystems in terms of what are the incentives, what are the capacities, what are the civil society and indigenous group motivations, donor intervention, and in a way existing capacities and priorities within the system. So this is the tool that monitoring and evaluation analysis MESA tool offers to the government, and then as we go, we tailor the approach. Next, please. So with in Solomon Islands, with the Ministry of National Planning and Development Coordination, we focused on national M&E systems under the National Development Strategy 2016 and 2035. This is really an important place to start this work, because this long-term strategy informs future development of Solomon Islands, and they have built quite impressive architecture to how M&E under this strategy will inform provincial development, the plans that ministries have, specific ministries have, and project budgeting on annual, 3-year and 5-year terms. We have also been impressed to see that in terms of the architecture and processes and policies in place, Solomons is doing really well. They have national M&E framework and plans. They have national M&E policy, reporting templates across line ministries, some well-prepared centralized databases, budget incentives for results-based performance, strong donor coordination, but all of this is very good in theory. In practice, we saw a lot of shortcomings. Next, please. So we wanted to look specifically how those shortcomings were translated in the area of reporting on climate change and environment. And we looked at one of the key objectives that National Development Plan has on resilient and environmental sustainable development with effective disaster risk management, response, and recovery. So, of course, a small country like Ireland, the Solomons, that has several islands and faces a very strong climate risks, the emphasis of the National Development Strategy is on risk management. However, the emphasis on adaptation and the impact on its population, gender, social groups have been rather limited. And what I mean under this is that we found that the overall results framework was rather limited. It was not well aligned with the Solomons National Adaptation Program of Action and its indicators. We also hear that there has been challenges to cooperate and integrate data collection, data analysis, measurement with the Ministry of Environment to show a fuller picture on climate adaptation in the country, and this, in a way, has created some shortcomings into how well climate adaptation considerations are integrated into national planning, into national budgeting. However, there are opportunities to further collaborate on this, and I think this will require a stronger collaboration as well as capacity building in terms of using this data and integrating this in the national planning cycle. Next, please. So the Solomons mess.
Katie, we are at the time, so
yeah. Okay, I'm about to summarize. The Solomons method really focused on what to take forward. So focus on how to operationalize the existing M&E systems and link it better with across the climate and social and environmental lens. And in a way, what matters the most for the island, to take advantage of its rich indigenous traditional systems for evidence generation and evidence use, and really to have a demonstrative use of such evaluations. Next, and I'm finished. So I think some opportunities already came out, and one is to work very closely on enhanced transparency framework development so that platform can create a more coordinated work opportunity in this area. The second one is to provide more hands-on capacity building for use of evaluations and data. And the third one is national learning forums, which could create a possibility in the country to really emerge the culture of evaluations with focus on how climate is impacting a small nation, how it impacts its women, its marginalized population, and how to take measures. Thank you very much. This is all I wanted to share with you.
Thank you very much, Ketevan, for really demonstrating how you're integrating climate change, gender, and social inclusion, right? In a small island like the other Pacific Islands, which has been impacted by climate change, loss of marine habitats, and a lot of other environmental issues. But with that, thank you very much again. We move over to Carolina. Carolina is an evaluation analyst at the Ministry of National Planning and Economic Policy in Costa Rica. She's a sociologist and an evaluator with 10 years of experience in management and implementation of various evaluation processes in the academy, German international cooperation, the Costa Rican public sector, and as an independent consultant. So we're going to hear from Carolina on an evaluation of non-reimbursable international cooperation in biodiversity and climate change received by Costa Rica, but more importantly, how these findings are actually being used by the government. Over to you, Carolina.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, yes, I will share a little bit of the experience of this evaluation and two very important topics for Costa Rica, of course, but also for the world. Next, please. And I would like to start saying or asking, well, why we choose this evaluation. It was a very important interest at the highest level, which is not only in our ministry, but at a presidency level. And we also performed this evaluation as a thematic evaluation because it was going to be the first of its kind into our national evaluation agenda. But it was also a very special evaluation because usually this type of evaluations are led out by donors. In this case, is the recipient country, which is evaluating the international cooperation. We also include a very strong focus on the 2030 agenda and the SDGs analysis, especially if we compare it with some other evaluation of the agenda. And also this set up like the previous experience for some other evaluation that we are conducting in the future. And last but not least, we also perform a systematization of the lessons learned. We hope that this information, besides of collecting good practices and also some other challenges that we face in this evaluation, could help other countries in performing similar processes. Next, please. We identified some contribution in achieving the SDGs. As you can see in the screen, there's an overall analysis identified that we were contributing with 6 SDGs, 7, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Especially, I have a very special sentiment for the 17, because most of the projects in biodiversity and climate change are performed by different institutions. And this means that they have to work together to make things happen. Next, please. Regarding the 2030 agenda principles, we also use it as guidance in this evaluation. We, as you can see, the no one left behind, we use the equity principle and of course, the environmental sustainability principle. We integrate this throughout the whole evaluation process, especially through the different topics that were linked to the evaluation questions. We make these very clear in the terms of reference, and also we identify this in the portfolio analysis that we had to perform before we start the evaluation in order to have a better understanding of some of the tendency of the international cooperation, but also so we can gather some data that we needed to identify some results. Regarding some of the conclusions, we could see that the alignment between the cooperation received with the national goal and the international convention was rated average. This means that not all of the time we could identify some very clear or very specific information regarding the country's goal. Next, please. It was very important for us that the information that this evaluation gave us, it was not all the time the needs or the national needs were meeting the cooperation that we were receiving. In this case, we have to make very sure that in the future, we use the cooperation not only as a financial tool. And this is a very important element because politicians and cooperating countries and agencies need to understand our cooperation model in order for us to reach our national goals regarding these two topics. Regarding the second point, it is the presence of cross-cutting approaches. And in this case, unfortunately, we identified that it was more of a theoretical than a real implementation of these approaches. And I'm talking about gender approach and also participation approach, because in most of the projects, biodiversity and climate change, it was not present. And for example, the gender approach was present only in 9% of the projects design that we could analyze. Even though that the importance is recognized by the implementers of the projects, the reality is that we went deep into the analysis of the different projects. It was also something that it was mentioned at the beginning of the design, and it was like kind of left behind throughout the implementation of the different projects. So this is something that we definitely are working on. Regarding the first point, even though that the alignment, it was not very clear, we could identify a contribution to the achievement of the national goal, especially if we talk about addressing the biodiversity loss and the climate change mitigation. And this is because of the collaboration and the coordination between institutions that facilitated these results. Also, a very important conclusion is that the results are sustainable, with some exceptions, of course, but in general, there is appropriation of them, and this is due to the creation of different public policies that take the results of the different projects as input to continue the work in the field. Next, please. And if we talk about the use of the evaluation, I have to mention first that every evaluation that is included in our national evaluation agenda have to consider the guidance for the use of the evaluation, the one that you have on your left. And we are still implementing the action plan, which is based on the management response. And we are due in a couple of years, actually, because there's a lot of work to be done. We are working in a very important point, which is for us to disseminate the cooperation model to make sure that we're so the cooperation, the donors, the cooperation countries, and also our political level are in line, and they're know very well which are the needs that we need in the country regarding our national goal in biodiversity and climate change. We're trying to improve also the knowledge of the management in the different projects and trying to do a very dissemination of the products and the results of the work that we have been doing for the past years. We are trying to strengthen the articulation of the stakeholders and also the institutional capacity. This has been definitely a challenge for the institution because it implies a change of mind. They have to do things different, and this is not something that it comes easy for the institutions and for the technical level. So this is something that we have been working out very closely, especially so these can reflect in the design of the different programs and projects in biodiversity and climate change. Next, please.
Carolina, we are out of time.
Yes, just one more slide. And is that while we're still working in trying to foster advisory to institutions and stakeholders to set baselines so we can monitor results, set availability. We also want a better link with the SDGs. And right now we are trying to improve the quality of the interventions for the environmental sector. We are initiating an evaluation of the National Strategy of Biodiversity using an SDG and the 2030 Agenda approach. So hopefully we have the results at the beginning of next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolina. And I think one thing that came out very clearly here is some of the actual constraints to practical implementation, right? Looking for behavioral change in government bodies, looking for how do you collect the right information, and then how do you convey the information, and then the findings of the evaluation to drive that behavioral change. If there's one, in the interest of time, I think we can leave some of the questions towards the end of the second session as well, because integration of inclusion and gender is also very important in the climate agenda. I think one thing you need to start thinking about is starting with a theory of change and how would climate change and other environmental issues, because climate causes and is impacted by other environmental changes, how does this actually feed into the theory of change? I think before even thinking about indicators, before thinking about evaluation tools and mechanisms, just highlight and draw out the simple results chain and the theory of change. So I would encourage everybody to start there before getting too ambitious. So with that, I think I'd like to hand it back to, I think for the next session, or there's a video coming up. Heather, over to you.
Yes, Heather.
Thanks, Patricia. As we started preparing for this event, we invited the participants who attended the National Evaluation Capacities Conference in October to send us a very short video or a PowerPoint slide telling us and all of you what they have been doing to take forward the Turin agenda. So we're going to take a little bit of break between the live speakers now, and we're going to share a video with all of the contributions that we received. And I really want to thank everybody who took the time to prepare a little video or to prepare the PowerPoint for us. And also I'd like to apologize to some because your contributions were so rich and detailed, but we have a really limited time, so we needed to reduce some of the text so that we could squeeze it into this event. So if you do need to step away from your computers during the break, please do be back within the next 10 minutes for the continuation of the live segment. And meanwhile, enjoy learning what several countries have been doing. Note that we won't have any interpretation during the video, and the slides are in the language that we received them in. So many thanks again to all who contributed, and see you again in a few minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Tamuru Tarrafa Charannet from Ethiopia. I am working for the Ministry of Planning and Development of Ethiopia. The Turin agenda is very important for our country. Also, it is very early to talk about the progress according to Turin agenda. We already ahead of that because we were working on the strengthening the monitoring and evaluation system, the national development plan at the country level. We have a kind of training, the capacity building training. The capacity building training was being conducted just bringing together those directors and focal persons working on M&D and planning from 20 sector ministries. We are also working on strengthening partnership among stakeholders, especially UN agencies. So we are working on this issue. So we will continue our effort to bring realistic the Turin agenda. Thank you very much.
My name is Dr. Angelina Matidio Bazuba, the Director of the National Transformational Leadership Institute. Since the NEC conference, I've been working to strengthen the national evaluation system by organizing activities and events that brought people together. We organized the international conference that brought women from the national level to the grassroots level, but also women from different countries to come and share knowledge and experiences. We've also worked with the government from the national level to the grassroots level, strengthening the local government organization and also the local government authorities to really know what are the programs happening at the national level and trickle them down to the grassroots level. In the process, a number of issues pertaining evaluation and monitoring were captured. In this way, it gave the government authorities at the grassroots level the ownership of the process, but also the ownership of the program to be able to monitor it effectively.
Hello, my name is Prudence. I'm Director Monitoring and Evaluation in the Ministry of Finance and National Planning in the Government of the Republic of Zambia. I attended the 2022 NEC conference in Turin, and following my attendance of that conference, I have made some collaborative engagements with stakeholders. My team at Monitoring and Evaluation Department met with the Zambia Monitoring and Evaluation Association to discuss collaboration in terms of capacity enhancement in evaluations across government. We also met with the World Bank to agree on how they can provide technical assistance to the department for us to improve our data visualizations in terms of knowledge management of the information that comes out of our evaluations, censuses, and surveys. So we are looking forward to having further collaboration with stakeholders so that we can take the evaluation agenda forward. Thank you.
And we are back. We hope you enjoyed all the video and all the inputs that we received from the country. Thank you very much to everybody who submitted their updates. And now we will transition to the second part of the conference, where we can learn from what is already happening to ensure that evaluation systems are gender and inclusion responsive. And it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of the next session, Megha Pradhan, which is the director of the CLEAR South Asia Center. Megha, take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on which part of the world you're joining from. I'm dialing in from Delhi, India, where we are facing exceptionally heavy rains in a typically dry month, giving us proof of climate change just in case we needed more. I was incredibly fortunate to be part of the discussions at the National Evaluation Capacities Conference held in Turin last year. And I think it was really heartening to see this video and see the work that governments have done over the last 6 months to take forward the Turin Agenda. As already noted, the Turin Agenda highlighted the importance of prioritizing inclusiveness and leaving no one behind, as well as efforts to address intersecting inequalities. We've seen how across the world, progress towards gender equality has witnessed reverses with multiple crises in recent years. Yet many evaluations and evaluation systems do little more than include sex disaggregated data. So in this session, we will try and examine what do we need to do to ensure gender and inclusive responsive national evaluation systems in the true sense. Similar to the last session, we have invited 3 experts from 3 different continents to give lightning presentations on some of the amazing work that they have been doing on this theme, things that are going to be very, very good learning for the audience that's part of this session today. I would request all of you to post your comments, questions in the chat window, and we will try our best to come to them after the presentations. So now moving forward with the introductions, I will first like to invite Sylvia Grandi, who is the Deputy Director of Evaluation at Global Affairs Canada. Sylvia has more than 15 years of experience in designing, managing, and conducting evaluations, and her evaluative work has had a strong focus on gender equality and integration of feminist principles in evaluation practice. As a quick background, the Global Evaluation Initiative has, in partnership with Global Affairs Canada, recently launched a 3-year program called Feminist Innovation in Monitoring and Evaluation of FIME to focus on a gender transformative approach to strengthening M&E systems. So I'll now invite you, Sylvia, to share some of Global Affairs Canada's experiences with feminist evaluation. Over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you very much, Megha, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. 6 months ago in Turin, my colleague David Marcheseau shared Global Affairs Canada's experience with operationalizing feminist principles in our evaluation. So I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be here today with you to tell you a bit about what we've been busy with since. Next slide, please. In Canada, and in particular at Global Affairs Canada, we have a strong foundation when it comes to a robust evaluation system, evaluation capacity, and all of this with a strong gender lens. But there is still room to push boundaries to make our evaluation system more equitable, more inclusive, and more representative of the diverse voices, including the marginalized and vulnerable ones that we meet in our work. So in other words, to make our own evaluation system more feminist. So this is what we've been busy with. In addition to continuing to explore how to integrate feminist principles in our evaluations, we've also been trying to mainstream feminist principles in our evaluation system and in the work that we do with our partners. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on reminding you what feminist evaluation is. At Global Affairs Canada, I will be very happy to answer any questions you might have on this. But just in very general terms, at its core, for us, feminist evaluation is an evaluation that it's an evaluation approach that tries to embody core feminist beliefs, and at the same time is aligned with modern evaluation practices. Next slide, please. It really affects the way we do our work. Feminist evaluation is not a set of tools, it's rather a lens or a way of seeing evaluation. And it's an approach that pushes us to take, click one more time, please, to take an activist stance as evaluators. It pushes us to act on opportunities to create, advocate, and support change through our evaluation work. Next slide, please. So what are some of the things we've done and some of the successes we've had in mainstreaming feminist evaluations, feminist principles in our evaluation system? Let's start with our corporate evaluations. So these are our centralized high-level evaluations. We're at the point now where we expect all our evaluation teams, these are internal teams, to take into consideration how to integrate feminist principles in all our evaluations. Also those that are maybe a bit less easy to frame in this way. And we've done a lot of work in educating, informing, advocating with our senior management around this approach. So now they expect us to do this. They ask us, so how are you doing this in this specific evaluation? So we see a mentality change there. We've also developed tools that we can apply to all our corporate evaluations, the gender empowerment measurement tool, for example, or our privacy and protection toolkit that really pushes us to be very systematic in how we address ethical considerations in our evaluations. When it comes to decentralized evaluations, these are the evaluations that are conducted by our program colleagues, and we provide technical support to them. We have developed a new guidance on how to, right title, Guide to Planning and Managing Feminist Decentralized Evaluations, intended for program managers in their role as evaluation commissioners. And we're doing trainings and on this, and we've started to have some pilots of decentralized evaluations that are implementing this. We also do capacity strengthening in evaluation, both internally. We now have a community of practice, for example, of colleagues across the department who deal with different aspects of monitoring and evaluation, and we're interested in feminist approaches. And as it was mentioned before, we're very proud of our partnership with the GEI, with the FEMA project to contribute to strengthening capacity in feminist evaluation in national systems in developing countries. And we also keep pushing for feminist evaluation through our evaluation diplomacy channels with our other government partners, other like-minded donors, and fora such as the OECD DAC. Next slide, please.
Livia, we already have time. Just a reminder.
Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. This is not easy. It comes with a few challenges. We've asked, should all evaluations be feminist evaluations? We feel that the principles are relevant to all evaluations, but the extent to which this should be applied vary, and how they look like vary. We've definitely faced challenging using the label feminist. So we decided that we don't necessarily need to use the label if we are true to the principles. There are situations where bureaucracy doesn't help. Some of our systems, procurement, for example, are not always very friendly to trying to do things in different ways. And things like participatory and empowering processes sometimes require longer timelines. And this sometimes put pressures on our own internal timeliness requirements. So overall, the main takeaway for us is that to continue to push the needle to make a difference in our evaluation systems, there is no need to be dogmatic. We feel that feminist evaluation can take many different forms, but at the same time, there is a need to be intentional. And so we continue to push a bit at a time and as much as we can. And this is our way of being activists in this respect. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. I think some very sort of interesting takeaways. I love the use of the term evaluation diplomacy. I think all of us are doing that as part of our jobs and completely sort of recognize the need to, educate, advocate, and inform, and something that you're doing not just with external partners, but a lot of times within sort of internal teams as well, to talk about the value of, this work. And then I think, how it's about principles and not labels, I think like very, very important, I think, takeaway here. So I'm going to move ahead to our next panelist. And before I introduce her, just as a background, I wanted to talk to you about how UN Women earlier this year published the results of a mapping of the incorporation of gender in national evaluation systems in 18 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. This mapping sought to open a space for debate on the possibilities for governments of the region to mainstream a gender perspective in their national evaluation systems in a systematic and progressive manner. The study found increased inclusion of gender perspectives in evaluations in the region, though there were differences between countries in terms of the level of integration and institutionalization. Colombia has emerged as one of the countries that has made notable progress in this area. And given this, I'm delighted to introduce Patricia Moreno, who's the Deputy Director of Evaluation at the National Planning Department in Government of Colombia. Patricia has worked as a specialist in planning, monitoring, and evaluation of public policies across different national and international entities. So I'm going to hand it over to Patricia now to talk about Colombia's experience in integrating gender in national evaluation systems. Over to you, Patricia.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación. Buenos días. Es para mí un gusto saludarlos y saludarlas a todos los participantes. Bueno, pues en Colombia y desde el Departamento Nacional de Planeación, que tiene la función constitucional y reglamentaria de hacer las evaluaciones de las políticas y programas estratégicos en Colombia y en el gobierno nacional, tenemos el compromiso de avanzar de manera decidida en la incorporación del enfoque de género en nuestras evaluaciones. Es por esto que desde hace varios años venimos trabajando con las personas expertas, con las personas que saben, que son las personas de ONU Mujeres. Desde hace varios años ellos se han convertido en nuestro gran aliado en enseñarnos sobre cómo debemos incorporar el enfoque de género en nuestras evaluaciones. En ese sentido, con ONU Mujeres, pues ellos han realizado varias capacitaciones a nuestro equipo de evaluaciones sobre qué debemos hacer y cómo lo debemos hacer. También nos han acompañado en el seguimiento a la ejecución de varias de nuestras evaluaciones. También hemos desarrollado un mapa de brechas de evidencia sobre estrategias para una vida libre de violencias contra las mujeres. También lo desarrollamos en conjunto con ONU Mujeres y también nos apoyaron en la construcción de un módulo de evaluación de la política de cuidado. Entonces, digamos que hemos venido trabajando con ellos y hemos ido avanzando de a pasos en lograr una agenda de evaluaciones con enfoque de género. Y esto lo hacemos porque desde Planeación Nacional entendemos la importancia de entender cuáles son esos efectos diferenciales que tienen las intervenciones sobre la población beneficiaria. Queremos entender cuáles son esas diferencias en los efectos entre hombres y mujeres. Queremos entender cuáles son esas posibles desigualdades e inequidades que se presentan, cuáles son las relaciones de género, qué oportunidades y limitaciones enfrentan los hombres y mujeres de acuerdo a su rol. Y esas, digamos que todo esto solo lo vamos a capturar si tenemos en cuenta el enfoque de género en las evaluaciones que nosotros realizamos. En ese sentido, nosotros todos los años estamos construyendo nuestras agendas de evaluaciones, procuramos incluir evaluaciones que vengan desde su diseño con el enfoque de género incorporado, pero también aquellas intervenciones que no lo incluyen desde su diseño, también incorporamos el enfoque de género en las evaluaciones. Entonces creo que eso es un primer punto que aprendimos y entendimos que así una intervención no incorpora el enfoque de género desde su diseño y desde su formulación, eso no es una limitación, para evaluarlo con enfoque de género y entender precisamente esos efectos diferenciales y esas relaciones de género. Entonces creo que eso es un primer paso y fue un gran avance en la construcción de nuestra agenda de evaluaciones. Y adicionalmente, de las evaluaciones que nosotros realizamos, también hacemos unos mapas de brecha de evidencia. Esto es una metodología de 3IE que nosotros adoptamos y la aplicamos en Colombia. Y también hemos elaborado hasta la fecha 2 mapas de brecha, uno que fue el que les mencioné hace un momento con ONU Mujeres, y otro sobre sistema de cuidado, y con esto lo que buscamos también es entregar evidencia que permita a tomadores de decisiones lograr mejorar esas limitaciones que se encuentran en las intervenciones y permitan alcanzar la igualdad y el empoderamiento de las mujeres. En segundo lugar, y creo que también es importante tener en cuenta, ya una vez se tiene definida la agenda de evaluaciones y se tiene definido cuáles son esas intervenciones que se van a evaluar, para nosotros es muy importante involucrar a todos los actores, y con todos los actores no me refiero únicamente a las entidades, por ejemplo, ejecutoras de las diferentes políticas o programas, sino también incluir a estas voces y a estas organizaciones de mujeres que pueden participar y tienen grandes cosas que aportar en la evaluación. Y también buscamos garantizar que se incluyan a las personas y específicamente a las mujeres más discriminadas, para que tengan voz durante todo el proceso de evaluación. Nosotros tuvimos una experiencia con la evaluación de la política de equidad de género para las mujeres, y en esta evaluación participaron varias organizaciones de mujeres que representaban a diferentes grupos de mujeres. Garantizamos que estuvieran mujeres discriminadas, y las invitamos desde el diseño de la evaluación para definir en conjunto con ellas cuál era ese alcance que querían que tuviera la evaluación y cuáles eran esas preguntas que ellas buscaban que la evaluación respondiera. Y luego en la formulación de las recomendaciones también las hicimos partícipes para que ellas retroalimentaran las recomendaciones que se iban a generar en el marco de la evaluación. Entonces creo que esto también empodera a las mujeres y hace también que se apropien con mayor facilidad de los resultados y recomendaciones de la evaluación. Otro aspecto que se debe tener en cuenta al momento de incorporar el enfoque de género en las evaluaciones es que esto debe quedar explícito desde los términos de referencia. Y con esto evitamos que el tema de resultados diferenciales sea como un hallazgo o algo accidental que se encontró, sino que desde el principio se explique qué es lo que se está buscando a lo largo de todo el proceso de la evaluación. Y cuando me refiero a que esto debe quedar explícito en todas las fases, digamos, o en todas las secciones de esos términos de referencia, pues me estoy refiriendo a cómo deben ser la conformación de los equipos, por ejemplo, que adelanten la evaluación, cómo se va a realizar ese mapeo de actores, qué metodologías se van a emplear, cuáles van a ser las fuentes de información, cuáles van a ser esas informantes idóneas, cuáles van a ser las preguntas de investigación, cuáles van a ser nuestras hipótesis y nuestros indicadores. Eso también es importante tenerlo en cuenta desde los términos de referencia. Adicionalmente,
Patricia, time is up.
Ok, muy brevemente y para cerrar, necesitamos que las evaluaciones no sean simplemente un análisis desagregado entre hombres y mujeres. Necesitamos entender además cuáles son esas relaciones de género que se presentan, cuáles son esas vulnerabilidades, cuáles son esas desigualdades, y para esto necesitamos aprovechar los registros administrativos que se tengan, que son una limitación en sí misma, pero pues si hacemos el levantamiento de información primaria podemos aprovecharlo e incluir otras variables que nos permitan hacer análisis de interseccionalidad. Y también es muy importante, y voy a mencionar dos cosas más y cierro con esto, las metodologías y métodos cualitativos de análisis que también nos van a permitir comprender un poco esos roles y esas relaciones que no son tan claras de identificar cuando se analizan información cuantitativa. Y en el momento de hacer el trabajo de campo también es importante tener un equipo de trabajo sensibilizado que no reproduzca estereotipos de género o sesgos, y adicionalmente tener en cuenta las limitaciones de la participación de esos actores, particularmente los discriminados y vulnerables, de tal forma que la evaluación se adapte a esas limitaciones que se presenten, de tal forma que puedan hacer parte del levantamiento de información. Yo creo que estos son como los aspectos principales que nosotros tenemos en cuenta al momento de incorporar el enfoque de género. Son los principales, no necesariamente sean los únicos o los mejores. Quería compartir con ustedes la experiencia de Colombia y pues nosotros seguimos trabajando. Ya dimos ese primer paso, pero sabemos que tenemos todavía mucho camino por recorrer y sobre todo tenemos que seguir trabajando en cómo hacer para que esas recomendaciones y esos resultados de nuestras evaluaciones sean usados por tomadores de decisiones para lograr reducir desigualdad y aumentar el empoderamiento de las mujeres. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Patricia. That was a very comprehensive presentation on a lot of the different ingredients that need to be part of this idea of integrating gender in evaluations. It's not just one thing, it's not a checkbox exercise, but a lot of deep thought needs to go into how we're doing this in a meaningful way. And I think especially, your point on, how women and other relevant groups need to be sort of part of the evaluation, not just at the data collection stage, right? It's not just about going and collecting data on them, but how they need to be involved in terms of even defining the scope of the evaluation and then going back to them after the evaluation with the results, with the insights that are there, how they're going to be used. I think that was very, very valuable. Thank you so much, Sylvia. So now I'm going to move to our last panelist for this particular session. I would like to introduce you to Martin, who is an economist in the Monitoring and Evaluation Division of the Ministry of Economic Planning, Development and Public Sector Reforms in Malawi. Martin will talk about a specific example of integrating gender lens in a country-led evaluation of COVID response. This is an urban cash transfer program that was implemented in Malawi, and there is an ongoing evaluation that's happening. And I think especially given what we've heard the first two speakers talk about, I think it'll be really interesting to see how does one actually apply some of these concepts in an actual evaluation, and potentially what are some of the challenges and learnings in doing so. So over to you, Martin.
All right, thank you very much, Megan. Yeah, so as lightly explained by Megan, I am Martin, working for the M&E division of Malawi government as the head of evaluation unit. We are undertaking a country-led evaluation, which is understanding the impacts of a cash transfer, which happened in urban setting. Just to begin with, in Malawi, like cash transfers have always been going to the rural areas, but specifically because of the impacts of COVID and necessarily the lockdowns and everything that happens under the economy, under the pandemic, urban poverty increased. So there was a response of a cash transfer to the urban areas. And one of the important criteria for accessing funds through this cash transfer was that one has to have a national ID. And interestingly, it happens that most households, only women have national IDs. So in the end, the cash transfers went into most households through the women, not men. So there were other anecdotal evidence of issues of changes or effects, potential effects on household social dynamics, where households are used that most income comes through in the household, either from government or from their private enterprises, comes through men. But this time around, it seems most of this cash came into most households through women. So there are issues of potential effects on intimate partner violence, on disagreements, on first of all, the modalities the money has come in. Secondly, how it's used, because the command is with the women. So we instituted this evaluation to see both economic and social outcomes into households. So one of the things we have also done through this evaluation, we have involved Ministry of Gender from the beginning, from the conceptualization, setting up the objectives, because Ministry of Gender was responsible, was the coordinator implementing the cash transfers. Also on the other end, because the social outcomes that we are examining, they are mostly issues that Ministry of Gender deal with. So furthermore, we can move to the next slide. Yeah, next slide, please. Yes. Yeah, now how gender is inculcated into this evaluation. We have asked questions, for example, those that include intimate partner violence for both spouses. That's the man and the woman, just to balance up on the outcomes that we get. So even though traditionally these kind of questions have only been asked to women, we're asking to both spouses. And then we are investigating whether gender of the recipient of the cash. Currently we have completed training in Mauritius. The picture in focus is where we're undertaking that training. And then we have also undertaking a pretest of the main survey, the quantitative survey of the evaluation. And interestingly, in the field, we are also finding that when we have gone to administer interviews, even though we included both males and females, it's only mostly females who have been found in the household. So this also adds another layer of a challenge to the innovation we brought in to try and ask both genders, and then we go in there, we find like there's a disproportionately high number of females who are found at home that we can be able to administer our questionnaires to. Yeah, so we can move to the next slide. Yeah, I think that in short, that's all. And so three takeaways. One, this is a cash transfer which happened in the urban, and cash transfer have traditionally been in the rural. So it's a learning curve, both in terms of assessing the tools for gender tools for understanding household socioeconomic outcomes. And also now we are also seeing a different layer from the rural areas whereby we are not finding men in the households when asking our questions. So these are maybe some of the things which are also food for thought for those who are maybe endeavoring on implementing similar kind of evaluations in other parts of the world. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin. I think that was really interesting. And as I said, I think it's very, very useful for us to sort of understand that, once you have designed something on paper and when you're implementing it in practice, what are some of the practical challenges that come about, and what are the different ways in which one can tackle. And I think some of these issues that you raised, these are things that come up in evaluations such as these, and I think there are a lot of interesting resources that are there, which I'm sure people in this panel would find sort of useful to look at, and then to see how we can tackle these issues. But it was very, very interesting, I think, to hear from all three panelists. Unfortunately, Patricia, I don't know, do we have time for questions?
Okay. We will have some time possibly at the end. But yeah, not now.
Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Patricia since we're on a tight timeline. And Patricia, of course, will talk about how do we look at integrating both gender and climate change in evaluations. So thank you so much to my panelists, and Patricia, over to you.
Thank you, Mega. And thank you to the panelists. Now, this is the time when we would like to actually hear from you. We've been looking first at how to integrate climate change consideration and then gender equality and social inclusion into national evaluation systems. But how do we bring all this together, and what do countries need, not only to strengthen their national evaluation system, but also integrate both the questions of climate and ecosystems and gender equality and social inclusion? So I'd like to ask my colleague Tudor to share his screen. We would like to hear from you. So we have prepared a poll so that you can answer our questions. Please, with your smartphone, kindly point at the QR code and then click on the link and enter the passcode. The first letter is an L, like in love, LFSKQT. So I'll give a minute to everybody just to get ready. You should see on your screen on the smartphone already the first question if you have entered the passcode. And the first question is, to what extent does your national evaluation system integrate gender? So please let us know how your systems are doing. Thank you. We will wait for a few minutes to see how the responses are flowing. Well, it's encouraging to see that at least to some extent they have been integrated already. And it would be very, very interesting to see, to have in the chat some comments from, especially from the people that said that is fully integrated. Please, if you would like, identify yourself and tell us a bit more in the chat. Thank you. Thank you to the 24 participants that expressed their opinion. I think we can go to the next question. So now it's your turn to give us a word or a couple of words to say what are the biggest challenges to integrating gender in evaluation in your context. Tradition, data integrity, organizational culture, knowledge, resources, misunderstanding, or basic understanding, cultural biases, lack of urgency, chauvinism, gatekeeping, no disaggregated data, lack of capacity, very well. If Dugan or Mega would like to say any word on the results we are looking at the moment, but it seems quite clear that culture and cultural biases play a big role, the lack of capacity and not knowing how to integrate gender consideration into evaluations and lack of data are the biggest driver of this. Thank you. Very well. And so we can go to the next question. So now we would like to know how your national evaluation system have integrated and to what extent have integrated climate change perspective. We are doing slightly worse, actually quite worse, it seems. And again, for whoever is putting now down in the chat, in the response that you have fully integrated climate change, please let us know where you're based. We would like to know more. Thank you. Next, please. So yeah, not very good landscape, it seems to me. So now please let us know what are the biggest challenges that you have faced in integrating climate change consideration into the evaluation systems. Capacity gaps, resources, knowledge, lack of data. It's difficult, yes. Capacity, yes. Knowledge, funding, data, evidence of linkages, lack of guidance, feeling the urgency or lack of urgency, budgetary constraints, knowledge of lack of coordination. So it seems that funding, capacity, again, and coordination have been among the most challenging aspects in order to that impede integrating climate change consideration into the national evaluation systems. Oh, it doesn't affect us. Okay. Political aspects. Time frame. Yeah. Very well. Thank you very much. And then we have the last question. What do you need to take this forward? And how can the GEI help? Please go ahead, give us your words. Capacity building, sharing good practices, toolkits, guidance, strengthening capacities, training and development, tailored capacity building, disseminate methodological guidance, political commitment. Real examples are very useful. Resources, advocacy, capacity building and linkages showcase the work countries are doing. Create more awareness to political elites. Tough question, need political will. Strategy guidance, capacity and training, setting clear goals for integrating the two areas. Strengthening capacities, development of tools, policies, success stories, political dimension, advocacy. Please continue to give us your opinion. We are really interested in seeing how we can help you to take this consideration into account. And maybe Dugan, I'd like to pass the microphone to you. Maybe if you would like to reflect on what we've just saw or on any of the things that we have listened. If you have a few minutes left, then we will address some of the questions and give the mic back to Gita and Mega. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I'm kind of a bit childlike how much I enjoy these sessions. It was so fantastic to have Mega and Gita moderate and to have you moderating. But what I really love is when we use technology to get feedback from people in that very inspiring way. You know, when the GEI was originally conceived, it was going to be called the Global Evaluation Capacity Initiative. And I think what these sessions do for us repeatedly is really remind us that what people need is support in building their capacity. And in many ways, they know how to do this stuff. There is, in fact, the expertise, there are the tools, there is the intention, but people often need to be guided and supported as they do what are, in fact, difficult and complex tasks. I have found the conversation really, really helpful, and I want to share with you a little some of the thoughts that I had. What I found so interesting about Geeta's session is this idea that, in fact, so much of what we need to do is already out there. There's a lot of data that's available to us. We don't need to always gather specialist bespoke data. If we are getting better at using existing resources in a way that is really intentional and guided by a shared vision of what evaluation could do, I think we'll get so much better at it. But more than anything, what Geeta's session raised for me was a focus on use, on how do we use evaluation? How do we actually make sure that the questions that are being answered through evaluations are the right questions? And how do we make sure that the evidence that gets generated is going to lead to better decision making? And that's something that I think we really all need to bear at the front of our minds. The second part, which was so interesting, was Mega's session on gender and inclusion. And I think what I got from that was such an interesting reminder that, again, these are things we know how to do, but often we don't have enough intention. And that intentionality is really what we have to be harnessing and mobilizing. That when people want to take account of gender, and when we take a feminist stance, it's not really just disaggregating and saying there were this many men and this many women, but it's about understanding the power relationships between people and thinking about how those play out and how they impact on people's lived material realities. And if we want to do those things, if we want to ask those questions, if we want to make better decisions, we have the tools. But what we need is an intention and a desire to use evaluation in a way that changes practices. I was very interested in the fact that gender seems to be better incorporated into evaluation systems than climate. And that reminds me that we've been doing this gender work for a long time, hey? It's taken us a while. When we think about the human experience, I think one of the big social enhancements that has happened over the past 100 years has been the women's struggle for equality. And that's something that we must take heart from when we think about climate. Often the climate struggle feels unwinnable. And I think we must take lessons from the gender struggles and think to ourselves, we've achieved so much with gender. Let's think about how we do those same things with climate change. Yeah, I could really drone on and on about this, but I just want to thank the speakers. I want to thank Patrizia. I want to thank Alan and Richard from UNDP for working with us on this. And I'm really inspired. And what I feel more than anything really is that the work that the Global Evaluation Initiative does as a partnership, as a coalition and a network is important. It's relevant. It makes a difference. And I think there's a real need for the work that we're doing. Back to you, Patrizia.
Thank you, Dugan. And since we managed to save a few minutes, I'd like to invite Mega and Geeta, if you have, we have a couple of minutes each, if you would like to give your remarks, please, if you're ready, let me know. Unmute yourself and go ahead.
Geeta, do you want to go first? Or...
Go ahead.
Great. No, thank you so much, Patricia. And it's nice that we have some time, I think, to have this discussion. I would have loved to use this time to see if there are questions from audience members on some of the presentations that we had. I think I've seen a lot of requests for information, for resources, toolkits, and I think that goes back to the point that Dugan was making, that I think that there is this recognition of the importance of both of these topics. People are trying to improve on it. I think what's needed, and that's really the role that I think the Global Evaluation Initiative is also trying to play, is have a space, have a platform for having all of these resources together so that it's not really people asking, people here and there. It's not ad hoc, but we have this sort of great platform for, resources of these important topics for people to use. I think the second point that I want to make, and, sort of Ian put this on chat, I think a lot of people were talking about what they need is capacity building and training. But I think there also we need to be very, very thoughtful and intentional again to think about, how are we building capacity? And, this is sort of taking forward the agenda on the National Evaluation Capacities Conference, as Ruku mentioned, even the Global Evaluation Initiative that is looking at capacity building, but thinking very carefully about how capacity building needs to go beyond one-off trainings, and how when we're working with governments, we have a process of, hands-on learning by doing, wherein we are really building the capacity in a very systematic and sustained manner. So I think that's something that I want to sort of add, something that's relevant for, I think, both gender and climate change and across the board. That's it from my side. I will pass it on to Geeta.
Thanks, Megha. Just to build on what Megha said, because I completely agree on the knowledge sharing and building capacity part, but I think it's also important that one clearly simplifies what is perceived to be complex, right? So it's teaching people to parse out the various components. What does a systems approach mean? I mean, we've used a lot of jargon today and in the literature. There's a lot about, can we use a systems approach bringing climate change, environment, socio and economic mandates together? And I think that GEI, along with agencies, along with people like us at the Jeff IEO, can actually help and play an instrumental role in demonstrating that this doesn't need to be a complex approach. And so how do you use evaluation effectively to demonstrate that, whether it's through theories of change, through simplified indicators? Our job is to make a perceived complex system easier to evaluate and to interpret it. So I'll stop with that. Thanks a lot very much, everybody. And I've also found the session very useful.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you, Megha, for these final remarks. I would like to thank everybody for being here. The need for knowledge and for sharing information is evident. This session had at this peak over 240 participants. So we will be following up the meeting with publishing the proceeding from this conference and the recording. Give us a few days of time, but we will be following up with all of you. And also, this is already an open invitation. We will be having another event in October. It will be NEC+12. So 1 year after the NEC conference, and see how we progress with the Turin agenda. And so now for the closing remark, I'd like to pass again the floor to Alan Fox. Alan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. And of course, my job was made easier by the great summary that Dugan provided. And of course, let me echo what he indicated in terms of the thanks to all of the participants and the moderators and the presenters who did an admirable job of moving this through. Patricia, thanks for pushing us forward to get all of the presentations done. Megha and Geeta, a great job in terms of the summary, also in terms of the key issues that we were discussing as it relates to gender inclusion and making sure that we take into account climate issues. I think it was interesting to see in the voting a recognition that we have a lot of work to do, even on gender aspects, to make sure that they are fully included in our evaluation work. and how do we get around the complexity of climate change to make sure that it's an important part of our evaluations moving forward. Listen, from UNDP, we were working these every 2-year national evaluation capacity conferences. And then we would wait and come up 2 years later and try again. And there was always the sense of what do we do in between and how do we keep this going? Because in addition to the discussions and the capacity building that Dugan mentioned, what's also very important for all of us is a sense of community that I think this type of initiative provides. And we were very pleased for the Turin National Evaluation Capacity Conference to engage and bring in Global Evaluation Initiative. GEI really provides that glue, that connection for us as we move forward. We do look forward now that this type of every 6 months, a chance to come back and tackle some of the very difficult issues that the Turin agenda has really discussed or raised for us. How do we engage with stakeholders? How do we deal with evaluation in crisis settings, in addition to the ones, for instance, that we just took up today? So from my perspective, this is a great way forward. I want to thank all of you, the participants, a very strong showing of interest, and we look forward to continuing engagement with you as we go. We look forward to the next step where we'll all be together in October to continue our further discussion. So thank all of you, and thank in particular GEI for putting this very well structured event for us today. Good luck to all of you, stay well, and we look forward to future conversations on all these important evaluation issues. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.